Breaking news, we were watching the vote on the House floor, the compromise immigration bill. And remember, I gave you those early numbers of how it was taking a hit via Ann Ball, one of our producers on the ground. Well, it didn't change. 121 yays to 301 nays. The bill fails on the House floor. What's next? We will report the news. I'm Harris. Here's Dana.
Fox News Alert, the House again coming up short in an effort to pass an immigration bill after another measure just went down to defeat. Hello, everyone. I'm Dana Perino, and this is the Daily Briefing. Today's bill contained $25 billion for President Trump's border wall, as well as a path to citizenship for Dreamers. This coming just 1 week after the administration reversed course on its zero-tolerance policy on immigration. Senior Capitol Hill producer Chad Pergram is live at the Capitol. Chad, why did this bill fail this time?
Well, it simply didn't have enough support across the Republican side of the aisle. The vote was 301 to 121. I want to take you back to a vote last week. There was a so-called conservative bill, not one that was considered to be a compromise or a consensus bill, a conservative bill that got 193 Republicans to vote yes. They were nowhere near the ballpark on that, and it makes one wonder whether or not the Republican leadership was putting the emphasis on the wrong bill. Now, consider what they did. They have defeated a bill that provided $25 billion in hard money for the wall. One of the biggest problems with this piece of legislation for many Republicans was that it provided a path to citizenship for most DACA recipients. They view that as amnesty. There's probably a coalition of anywhere from 10 to 40 Republicans who just won't vote for any bill on the floor that deals with immigration because they could be portrayed as voting for amnesty. So what this does, Dana, is it punts the fight over the border wall till late September. There was a meeting at the White House earlier this week between President Trump and Republican appropriators from the Senate and the House. They're the ones that control the purse strings. They're trying to get maybe a deal, maybe increase border funding to $5 to $6 billion, not the full $25 billion, and then in exchange for that, maybe get some Democrats to come along if they can get a DACA fix. That seems to be the flashpoint as we approach October.
But Chad, the president did fully support this bill that they were voting on today. Did Republicans who voted no feel like that wasn't enough to get them to vote for it?
Obviously, I mean, the president came up here last week. He campaigned for this bill. Kirstjen Nielsen, the Homeland Security Secretary, was brought to Capitol Hill making her appeal. Steve Scalise brought her up here. And at the end of the day, when they have passed immigration legislation in the past, 6, 7, 12 years in the House of Representatives and the Senate, it's been bipartisan. They can only lose 20 votes on the Republican side of the aisle. Look at the Senate bill that passed a couple of years ago. It didn't go anywhere in the House. They got 68 yeas, and that's because it was bipartisan. When you try to do it on just one side of the aisle, it's probably not going to work.
And then, Chad, quickly, what does the loss of Joe Crowley mean for the future of any party leaders on the Democratic side?
Right. Well, it means a lack of clarity for Democrats because there was a long line of people who thought that Joe Crowley might be the heir apparent for Nancy Pelosi, whether or not the Democrats got the majority back or not. She might be, pushed aside if they didn't, get the majority. She might be pushed aside if they did get the majority. But consider the list of Democrats who were thought to be her successor over the years who aren't here anymore. People not named Steny Hoyer. I look at Rahm Emanuel, now the mayor of Chicago. Chris Van Hollen, then a congressman from Maryland, now a senator from Maryland. Steve Israel, congressman from Long Island, he retired. Javier Becerra, now the attorney general in California, and now Joe Crowley. And at the end of the day, he lost his district. He lost his primary. And if you don't take care of the little things, and this is the lesson that Eric Cantor learned, remember, he was supposed to be the heir apparent to John Boehner as Speaker of the House, then you can't do the big things.
Indeed. All right, Chad, if you could just hold on for a second. Do we have anything more that I could ask Chad with this breaking news? All right, we do have Shannon Bream. Thank you, Chad. Shannon Bream is standing by. Tell me, we've got breaking news. This is huge news. Go for it.
Yeah, all right. We are hearing that that Justice Kennedy is submitting. Now, we've run into the court to try to see if we can get a copy of this letter and confirm independently for ourselves. But the letter that's circulating is that Justice Kennedy has told the president he is going to respectfully notify him of my decision by effective July 31st this year to end my regular active status as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. He will continue on. He says, "Remember of the legal profession, it's the highest honor to serve this court. Please permit me by this letter to express my profound gratitude for having had the privilege to seek in each case how to best know, interpret, and defend the Constitution and the laws that must always conform to its mandates and promises. Respectfully and sincerely, Justice Anthony Kennedy." So he did not make an announcement from the bench this morning. We're working on getting our hands on this letter for ourselves, but it looks like he is telling the president that he is retiring effective July 31st. He has been key, critical, instrumental in a number of key cases here. He has been the swing vote. He has been a huge advocate for LGBT rights. And in that, he has been one of the key architects of things like same-sex marriage opinion. He wrote that here. It changed everything across the country. He's often talked about the dignity of gay families and gay couples and the children they raise. He's been a huge advocate for that. But he didn't give it to us this morning. It sounds like we're getting it now. This fact that he wants to step away from the bench. He's going to be 82 next month. Sounds like he's ready to retire. This will open up yet another seat for President Trump. And now we officially have this from the court. This is the official confirmation. Justice Kennedy has today advised his colleagues he is submitting to the president a formal notification of his decision effective July 31st of this year to cease active status. Now, this can go a lot of different ways. We had talked about this last year, again this year. There's been a lot of pressure from folks on the Hill who wanted Justice Kennedy to step down in case the GOP loses the Senate this fall and is unable then to confirm more easily whomever the president would choose to nominate to fill Justice Kennedy's seat. This is historic. It is epic because he has been the key swing vote. It is likely if the president appoints someone, nominates someone, and they get confirmed who is in the mold of a Justice Gorsuch, it will actually have decades of implications for this court because Justice Kennedy was appointed, of course, by President Reagan. He was appointed by a Republican president, but had often gone with the left on key critical decisions. He was conservative at heart, but in key cases, he'd actually gone to the left. So now if President Trump gets to pick someone and gets them to the bench with the Senate now having taken this down to a 51 vote threshold to get someone onto the bench, he really could shape this. If he takes somebody who is very young and very conservative and much in the mold of Justice Gorsuch, this really will last for generations beyond President Trump, whether he serves one term or two. This decision that he has now with this open seat, and we've seen the short list. He put two of them out before he picked Justice Gorsuch. We know some of the names that are in the mix. This is going to be clearly cheered across the board by conservatives and those who tend to be conservative legal scholars, because this appointment, even though it's a Republican president appointing someone who was appointed to a seat that was originally filled by a Republican president, it's not the same. Justice Kennedy's been a key swing vote, and this will make a huge difference in decades to come on the court, potentially.
That's so true, Shannon. I remember working in the White House on June 30th of 2005. All of a sudden getting a surprise letter from Sandra Day O'Connor, one of the justices, deciding to step down. And that then allowed for Chief Justice Roberts, his nomination to take place. And it was seismic. Of course, Justice Kennedy gave decades of his life to public service, and we should be grateful for that service. But you're right. Now that he has made this decision, the strategy and the politics are huge, especially coming on the heels of these two big decisions over this past week, three, I guess I should say, where the president feels like having Neil Gorsuch on the court was the key to the wins for conservatives and for his administration. Shannon, I think you're going to stick around, but I do want to bring in Chad Pergram, who we were talking to about the immigration bill. That just failed just a few minutes ago. But this news is going to supersede that because, Chad, at this point, from my experience, now all eyes are going to focus on this nomination. The Democrats will be riled up, but there might not be anything they can do to stop the Republicans from getting their pick seated on the court. Your thoughts?
Two people are in the driver's seat: Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, and the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Chuck Grassley. Keep in mind what Mitch McConnell did a year ago, April, just to get Neil Gorsuch confirmed. He executed what's called here on Capitol Hill as the nuclear option. And this is what you alluded to a moment ago, is that they lowered the threshold for filibusters in the Senate for Supreme Court nominees from 60 votes to a simple majority of 51. This was not a rules change. This was a bit of parliamentary chicanery that basically changed the precedent. The Senate does a lot of its business on precedent, and what they did with the confirmation of Neil Gorsuch is they altered the precedent. This door was opened by Harry Reid, the former Democratic leader in the Senate, in the fall of 2013, and what we sometimes refer to here on Capitol Hill as nuclear option 1. He changed the precedent, the threshold for all types of judicial nominees, all administration nominees from 60 to 51. Well, that kind of opened Pandora's box, because once Mitch McConnell realized that there was no way to confirm Neil Gorsuch, he made sure the Democrats got a taste of their own medicine with nuclear option 2, and we could have nuclear option 3 now. Keep in mind that the Senate is scheduled to be in session all August long. And if the president is able to submit a nominee pretty soon, we could have confirmation votes, hearings sometime in August before they could start the next term in October.
All right. I want to ask one question. So the change that McConnell made for the Gorsuch, is that now the precedent? They only need to get 51. Okay, so
right. They've changed the precedent for all Supreme Court nominees. Now they still have 60 votes for legislation.
Well,
that's
and you
another issue.
And Democrats who are going to be very frustrated today. I mean, they have to look back and I think blame Senator Harry Reid for starting them down that path. I mean, he was the one who broke the initial precedent, and now you have this situation. So they are going to be disappointed, and it will be a big fight. If you'll stick around, Chad, just for the rest of the hour, because this is huge breaking news, and I have Judge Andrew Napolitano. We were going to talk about 3 different things.
We were, and I sent you all those notes.
I know, and they were very good notes. They will go to good use. But let's talk about this. How big a deal is this? Because this has been a 5-4 court for conservatives that actually end up winning. It could end up being more like 6-3.
Justice Kennedy has been the swing vote on many issues, and as Shannon pointed out a few minutes ago when this news first broke, he sometimes sides with the liberals and sometimes sides with the Democrats, and sometimes sides with the conservatives. But I suggest to you that the key issue will be abortion. Even though Justice Kennedy is Roman Catholic and was appointed by Ronald Reagan, he has consistently sided with the liberals on abortion. If President Trump nominates a pro-life nominee, you will see a titanic battle in the Senate and throughout the country, because that will create a pro-life majority on the Supreme Court for the first time since Roe versus Wade.
And do you think that that would be hard to get confirmed?
I don't know. I mean, Chad would have a better feel than I.
Well, maybe we can ask them that again.
On what will happen in the Senate, but I know that the battle will be titanic. Look, it may be on other issues as well. It may be on youth. It may be on the role of government in our lives. Does he want someone just like Justice Gorsuch? Does he want somebody who's not on the bench? Does he want somebody so the person doesn't have a track record for the Democrats to pick apart?
Well, let me ask you this, though, because the Federalist Society has been very helpful to President Trump looking at all of these judges. Who might the Federalist Society think would be a good, or the type of person, maybe not a name, but the type of person?
President Trump has issued a list from which Justice Gorsuch came. He issued a second list after Justice Gorsuch was confirmed. He added 3 names to the second list. These are people who have a track record of keeping the government within the confines of the Constitution and enforcing personal liberties that are guaranteed by the Bill of Rights as they believe the framers intended them to be enforced. Let me tell you an interesting little tidbit from a private conversation that I can reveal because the person is dead.
Okay.
Justice Scalia.
May he rest in peace.
Yes, rest in peace. Before he passed away, obviously, told me that Justice Kennedy told him that as soon as there was a Republican president and a Republican majority in the Senate, he was ready to retire.
And isn't that interesting? Because a lot of people have thought of him as a little too squishy for the conservatives' taste, but that he wanted to do this when a Republican could be assured of being able to get a pick in?
I think he's a lot closer to John Roberts and Sam Alito than he is to Stephen Breyer and Elena Kagan. I'm just giving you examples from both camps. And even though he rejected the conservatives' views on abortion, I think he was more with them than not with them. But when Sandra Day O'Connor retired, she had been the swing vote between 4 liberals and 4 conservatives. Anthony Kennedy took that. Donald Trump is not going to be looking for a swing vote.
Nope.
He is going to be looking for a reliable traditionalist with libertarian leanings, just like he got in Neil Gorsuch, and he will probably go to that list, and it will either be amplified or reduced by his colleagues and friends at the Federalist Society, and then he'll pick one of those people, and we're in for the battle royal of the summer.
You're going to stick with me, right?
Of course I am.
And Chris Stirewalt, I believe, is with us. So Chris, do we have you?
You have me.
All right,
always.
we do. Very good. And in the meantime, Chris, I'm going to ask the control room, can you look for that list? I remember it, the one that President Trump put out with the possibilities, the other names that he might consider. So if we could try to find that in the meantime. Let me ask you, Chris, this news, shocking, surprising, but maybe not entirely, because people thought Anthony Kennedy might step down, and maybe they'd heard the other sort of comments that Judge Napolitano just revealed to us from a conversation he had with somebody who is now deceased. But he did not announce it this morning. The court doesn't have anything more to put forward, so I thought, well, I guess he's just gonna wait. That wasn't the case. How seismic is this in Washington?
Well, we'll find out momentarily. We'll find out in the hours and days to come how seismic, because the deal here is, we know basically, I'll put it this way, this is if you're 50 or under and you're a federal judge and you are a Federalist Society conservative, this is a good day for you. You are rechecking your resume, because this is a chance, of course, because we've seen the preference in both parties, presidents of both parties. You find a very young jurist, you find somebody who you think can hold that seat for decades. And this is a chance to shift the court.
And I'm sure they're going to look for somebody with a track record, so that they will be able to say this person does this. I'm now realizing why I got a call this morning from someone. Now it's all coming together. Okay,
it's all coming.
It was all out there, and I finally got it. Shannon Bream is still with us, Chris. If you could hold on. And you have more on what we were just talking about, this possible list of other nominees that the president might consider.
Yeah, and you remember the president put out one list and then a second list, and I'm told that they may actually add some names to those that are already out there. But there are people on this list, like Senator Mike Lee. He is somebody that we actually have scheduled on the show for 11 o'clock tonight, and I hope he doesn't cancel on us, because we've got a lot to talk about. He's clerked here, and there's a possibility that maybe one day he'd be nominated to serve here. His brother, who happens to be a state Supreme Court justice, is also on the list. There are a number of federal judges, and I think, as we saw last time, there are those key groups like the Federalist Society, very conservative legal organization that has played a big role in helping the president cull down a list and putting together a list of people for him to talk to. And they did last time, really the last 2 or 3 who were left, had an extremely long judicial record, so that you could look back, you could see years of what they've done on the bench. This wasn't a flippant decision. This was very calculated. It was very well studied in the case of Justice Gorsuch and the other finalists sort of that were there in the last minute with him. So they are going to want somebody, I think, with the same kind of track record that they can delve into. There will be no surprises. I can't remember which of your other guests said it, but maybe Judge Napolitano, I can't remember. But yes, President Trump, you may have said it, does not want a swing vote here. He's not going to want somebody that's going to morph into Anthony Kennedy. He's going to want somebody, as he's made many, many promises to pro-life groups, to conservative groups, to originalist groups. They're going to want to see in this next nominee that he sticks to somebody who has a very lengthy record that's good on religious freedom, that's good on abortion, that's good on small government, all of those things. They're going to expect to see that. So this list that we have now, which we're told will be added to, is likely going to be the people that will come to the top are those federal judges with a long record. Now, you know that this president and Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, working together, have really been stacking the bench with young conservative judges, getting people onto the district and appellate court levels. Many of them are really controversial. Across the street from us here in the Senate, they had a tough time getting through. There's been a lot of what Republicans would call obstructionism by the Democrats. Democrats saying some of these people are so radical, we're going to fight them, we don't want them on the bench. But there are females, there are others who are minorities, who a lot of people say the president would like the idea of nominating someone like that to say, look, I want diversity, but I want somebody to be conservative. So it'll be interesting to see who he gravitates toward. But now we know this is going to be a very interesting summer here in D.C. Yeah, it was quiet on the bench this morning, but this bomb dropped this afternoon, and it's really rattling people here at the Supreme Court. I talked to a lot of people close to Justice Kennedy, even some of his fellow colleagues who said if he's doing this, he's holding it very close to the vest. They seem to think he was going to stay. Most of us did until this letter this afternoon, Dana.
So interesting. And Shannon, stand by. We have Chad Pergram here, who has a little bit more about the Senate process and just some raw math of how the Republicans would try to get someone confirmed, especially if there are any changes in the Senate before the vote. Chad, your thoughts?
Right, things are always in motion, but for some time now, the Senate has basically been operating with a 50-49 margin in favor of the Republicans. And that's because John McCain has not voted since the 7th of December last year. So 50-49. So even with this nuclear option precedent to overcome a filibuster there, all it would take is one defection on the Republican side of the aisle when you have an odd number of votes in the Senate, and it could be 50-49 the other direction and tank the nomination, tank a filibuster. Now, to be clear, there has never been an actual filibuster of a Supreme Court nominee. There was a question about promoting an associate justice to Chief Justice who was filibustered in the late 1960s, but that was not an actual filibuster of a Supreme Court nominee. There's something else I want to focus on here. I asked Mitch McConnell yesterday, after the lunch and after the ruling in the travel ban case, I said, do you feel vindicated in the fact that you were able to block Merrick Garland from sitting on the court, muscle Neil Gorsuch onto the court, and then we have a 5-4 decision? It could have been 5-4 the other direction. He said, well, I'm glad that we have a court that definitely tilts to the right. Keep in mind here that this, Shannon says, this is going to take the court perhaps another direction. Democrats have always failed to energize their base when it comes to justices. This is something that the right and Republicans have done for decades now. It's something we even heard about in the 2016 election. I asked Chuck Schumer yesterday, and some other reporters did too, about whether or not this could be an issue and could they try to energize their base on the issues of judges. And frankly, Chuck Schumer didn't have a very good answer. So we could see that issue tee up if Democrats elect to make that a topic going into the midterms.
All right, Chad, thank you so much. Let's bring in now the anchor of Fox News Sunday, Chris Wallace. Chris, you've been in Washington for many of these nominations, and it's always so fascinating. And the Supreme Court is still one of the institutions that is trusted and revered in America. This is going to be an amazing summer for all sorts of reasons, especially because of this. Let's get your thoughts on this now.
I was just thinking as I was listening to my colleagues on the air, I think without any question, this is the biggest moment of the Trump presidency. Obviously, he's done a lot of big things. He went to Singapore and met with Kim Jong-un of North Korea. He passed the tax bill. He's done major deregulation. There have been some executive orders. But I think this moment is the biggest opportunity of the Trump presidency so far, because with the retirement of Anthony Kennedy, there was a very strict 4 conservatives and 4 liberals on the court, and Anthony Kennedy was the swing vote who often decided whether the conservatives won, or sometimes, not as often, but sometimes the liberals prevailed, especially on social issues. That if Donald Trump is able to nominate and confirm a solidly conservative justice and swing the court solidly 5-4 conservative, that is going to change the Supreme Court and could perhaps for a generation or two. This is a very big deal. And, I hear talk about, well, you don't want to swing judge. I did a power player this last week on, I have to say, I'm feeling pretty smart about it, about Leonard Leo, who is the key person at the Federalist Society who put together the list first of 11, then of 21, now of 21 people that the president has said he's going to name his Supreme Court justice or his nominee from. They are all reliably conservative. I said to Leonard Leo, is there one of them that is your favorite, or a couple of them that are your favorite? He said, frankly, we're so confident in this list that you could throw a dart at the list, and whoever the dart hit would be a solidly conservative justice on the Supreme Court. The one area where I would disagree with Shannon Bream, she was saying, they're going to want somebody with a long record on abortion and on a lot of these other issues. Excuse me. I don't know that I think that's true, because Neil Gorsuch didn't have a record on a lot of those issues. And they may want somebody who doesn't have a paper trail on those issues, but who they are convinced from association, from their general record, is a reliable conservative. I don't think it'll be a surprise. I think whoever it is going to be just as conservative as Neil Gorsuch and just as helpful to Donald Trump in terms of giving him a solid conservative majority on the Supreme Court.
Indeed. In fact, John Roberts, our White House correspondent, chief White House correspondent, has sent me the list just so that I have it here. And I remember a lot of these names from the last time around, and I have to tell you, I hadn't been thinking about it until this past week, and thinking, oh, will Kennedy or will he not? Maybe just one last thought from you, Chris, about how every president's legacy can be shaped by a Supreme Court decision. Certainly for George W. Bush with John Roberts and Justice Alito, those were two confirmations that the president could look back on and say, those are accomplishments from my administration. I know that President Obama bitterly disappointed in how he thinks that his nominee, Merrick Garland, was treated and not even given a chance to have a vote. But now President Trump, in a different situation, it's not a presidential election year. It's only a simple midterm. He will end up being able to get somebody confirmed. And how big a deal is that for somebody's legacy when you're commander-in-chief?
Well, I want to answer that, but before I do, I just want to make clear how vitally important Anthony Kennedy was, Dana, because he was the swing vote. He was the fifth vote on abortion that maintained abortion rights when all the conservatives wanted to either reverse them, repeal them, or at least to limit them sharply. He was the key vote on gay rights, same-sex rights. He was the man, in fact, who wrote those decisions. So replacing him with a solid conservative is enormously important. The answer is the Supreme Court nominee can either be a huge legacy builder for a president or can be very disappointing. George H.W. Bush, very upset. His chief of staff then, John Sununu, told him, appoint David Souter. He's on the New Hampshire Supreme Court. He'll be a reliable conservative. He became a reliable liberal. Dwight Eisenhower appointed Earl Warren to be the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Later said it was the biggest damn mistake I ever made. So it can either be somebody who furthers your legacy and what you want to accomplish in your presidency, or somebody who is just is a huge wrench in the gears and ends up preventing a lot of the things that you wanted to accomplish, which is why, frankly, the presidents have become very good at being able to choose people and know what kind of a justice they'll be.
All right, Chris Wallace, thank you for joining us with that perspective, and we will be sure to watch Fox News Sunday. His power player will be Leonard Leo. Judge Napolitano, if I could come back to you, wanted to get your thoughts about the big issues that are facing the country going forward. You mentioned a few of them. Of course, reproductive rights, abortion rights, that is always going to be one. But there are some bigger issues that we're dealing with.
There is a sleeper issue that lies at the doorstep of the Supreme Court that rises and sinks, and the public doesn't always catch it. And it's called deference to administrative agencies. It basically means we have this level of government which we never see. The Food and Drug Administration is a good example. The Securities and Exchange Commission that make rules, enforce the rules, and punish violators of the rules. The question is, when the behavior of those administrative agencies is appealed to the federal courts, should the federal courts second-guess the agencies, or should they presume that the agencies are correct? For years, the law has been the courts will presume that the agencies are correct. Justice Gorsuch is of the view, and I can tell you the President of the United States is of the view, that the agencies should not have this deference. They should be just like any other litigant there in the court, and they should have to prove their case to a federal judge. Just because they're a bunch of bureaucrats ruling on a bureaucratic issue, is that mud puddle in the farmer's yard navigable waters? Can we regulate it? They should have to prove the case just like anybody else. The more traditionalist, if you will, more libertarian, smaller government view to which Justice Gorsuch adheres, and on this he's been very clear, he's written extensively, and which the President of the United States looks for, is that they will be treated like any litigant. They can be second-best guessed by the court. They have to prove their case like anybody else.
And is there a case moving its way through the court system now about this?
Yes. There's another EPA. There's a classic example. There's another environmental protection administration case making its way through the court. I don't know the facts now, but the issue turns on this. Are they presumed correct because they're a bunch of federal bureaucrats, or are they just like any other litigant?
I think the court is going to say no. That's right. Judge, stay here. We have, we're going to bring in Congressman Doug Collins. He's a member of the House Judiciary Committee. And sir, we were glad that you could join us today, because this is quite an event in Washington, D.C. Whenever you have a Supreme Court nomination, it just is all hands on deck. You're on the Judiciary Committee on the House side, so you don't necessarily get to vote. But what do you think this means for the rest of the summer, for the congressional action that you expected to get done?
Well, I think we're going to continue with what we're supposed to be doing, but I did get a vote on this. I voted in November of 2016 for President Donald Trump. because I knew that these things were going to be coming up, and I knew that he had already laid forth what he wanted to see in Supreme Court justice. We knew going in that he was going to pick a conservative, he was going to pick an originalist, someone who sticks to a smaller government vision of a constitutional vision of what our government ought to look like. So I did get a vote. I may not be a vote in the committee when he brings forth the next nominee, but I got a vote along with a lot of people back then, because this is what we exactly were planning for.
Well, that, you bring up a good point. Certainly, when people after the election, when they were asked why did you choose to vote for President Trump, there were a lot of people that said the Supreme Court was a really big issue, and obviously, if you're leaning conservative, then you got to be pretty happy with the Neil Gorsuch pick, and then whoever will come next. Your thoughts about it getting through the Senate and the process there? It's not like there's a huge majority there. It's a slim majority. Do you think there will be any problems?
I think they'll always have the things that they have to look at and navigate that waterway through. But Mitch McConnell, I've had my disagreements with some things that they've done on policy and other things that I would like to see them take up from the House that we've passed. But on this issue, Mitch McConnell has been steadfast. He has said that we're going to get this done. He's changed the rules. They're going to get it through. They'll have a tight window to navigate. But I have all faith and confidence that the Republicans in the Senate will make sure that this happens.
I know that one of the issues that you're really interested in and you want to see some reform is on prison reform. You have some possibility of movement going forward. Do you think a change in the court and some activity and some focus on those issues could help you get that across the finish line?
Well, I think anytime when you're discussing our criminal justice system, that brings up a lot of different issues. It's good for our discussion and our national discourse. And I think, though, the prison reform is something the president has asked for in the State of the Union. He's talked about it on many occasions. So I think the total discussion is something that's very good. And we're looking forward to moving the bill that we passed with almost 100% of the Republicans and over 60%, I think it was, of Democrats in the House to the Senate. They've got that bill now. We had some great meetings on that. We're looking forward to it.
And Congressman, I was just told that President Trump, who spoke just a moment ago, and we're waiting for the tape, we'll play you as soon as we have it, but apparently he says that Justice Kennedy came to see him today at the White House. They spent about a half an hour together, which I think is quite a gentlemanly thing to do for Justice Kennedy, rather than just announcing it from the bench, to go to the White House and talk to the president before making that announcement. Your thoughts?
I think that's just respect. You know, sometimes in this town, we have the folks like the Maxine Waters of the world who wants to incite riots and violence and things against people they disagree with. It just shows that there is still some civility in a town, that it should be based on civility. And for him to go to the president and talk about this, I think that just shows the best of America. And I think that's what we always need to focus on, is the best of who we are, our better angels, and not those that divide us.
All right, Congressman Doug Collins, we appreciate you being here today.
Thanks so much.
And while we wait for that tape from the White House, I want to bring back in Chris Starwalt. Talk to me, Chris, a little bit just about the politics. Chad Pergram just said that the Democrats are not very good at rallying their base around these types of nomination fights. Do you think that could be different this time?
Well, there's a strategic decision that both parties have to make here with the election coming up. Now, it might be very much in the Republicans' interest for this matter to be not concluded in November. And you can see why. You can see how we saw in 2016 having that seat, the Scalia seat, open, having that vacant, gave a lot of Republicans who had misgivings about Donald Trump. One of the reasons that Donald Trump made such absolute decrees, such absolute blood oath promises about who he was going to pick, his advisors knew that the best way he could shore himself up with the conservative Republican base was to say, these are the kind of justices I would appoint. It worked for the Republicans remarkably well in 2016. It was great frustration for President Obama, as you mentioned, but what a great election issue for Republicans in 2016. And when the president delivers the Gorsuch pick, it pays off for these voters and it makes them much more satisfied. So do the Republicans want the matter concluded before the election, or do they want it to still be going on? If you're the Democrats, then the question is, do you want to try to delay? Do you want to say, no, I need more committee? Do you want to try to slow this down in committee? How do you want to play this? And can you, if you are the Democratic Party, finally get your base back engaged on this issue? The Supreme Court was an issue that Democrats used to be vitally interested in. Can Democrats now succeed in using this as an issue to get their base out? Or we saw the Janus decision today, which changes the role of government worker unions for potentially generations.
Right.
We've seen other big decisions this week. There's a lot
Chris,
going on.
If we could hold
Can
you
Democrats
there,
engage?
Mitch McConnell is speaking live on the Senate floor. Let's listen in.
For his ardent defense of the First Amendment and the First Amendment's right to political speech. As Justice Kennedy concludes his tenure on the court, We wish him, his wife Mary, and their family every happiness in the years ahead. The Senate stands ready to fulfill its constitutional role by offering advice and consent on President Trump's nominee to fill this vacancy. We will vote to confirm Justice Kennedy's successor this fall. As in the case of Justice Gorsuch, senators will have the opportunity to meet with President Trump's nominee, examine his or her qualifications, and debate the nomination. I have every confidence in Chairman Grassley's conduct of the upcoming confirmation process in the Judiciary Committee. It's imperative that the President's nominee be considered fairly and not subjected to personal attacks. Thus far, President Trump's judicial nominations have reflected a keen understanding of the vital role that judges play in our constitutional order. Judges must interpret the law fairly and apply it even-handedly. Judicial decisions must not flow from judges' personal philosophies or preferences, but from an honest assessment of the words and actual meaning of the law. This bedrock principle has clearly defined the President's excellent choices to date. So we'll look forward to yet another outstanding selection, but today the Senate and the nation thank Justice Kennedy for his years of service on the bench and for his many contributions to jurisprudence and to our nation. I suggest the opposite quorum.
All right, that was Senator McConnell talking about the Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy, who has announced his retirement today, and now there will be a confirmation process underway. I did want to ask Judge Napolitano something just real quickly while I have you here before we go to others that are in the queue. We talked about George W. Bush nominating and getting confirmed Judge Roberts and Sam Alito. But President Obama didn't have his mark on the court with Elena Kagan and Justice Sotomayor. So it's not that he didn't actually have a chance to have a legacy of Supreme Court justices.
You know, the Merrick Garland nomination, which will unfortunately be relegated to a footnote, was captivating. He was truly the most conservative nominee to the Supreme Court by a Democratic president since FDR nominated Robert Jackson, his own Attorney General, in 1940. But we all know what happened. Mitch McConnell saved that seat until a Republican had the opportunity to choose it. Commenting on what our colleagues have just been saying, the president now really needs to decide whether he wants someone with a long track record, which is obviously appealing to conservatives and libertarians, or whether he wants someone whose intellect and intelligence he trusts, but without a long track record, so there's less of a target there for the Democrats to pick at. I think he's going to be able to find that person from the list that he compiled. There are judges on that list with track records that go back 10 or 15 years. There are judges on that list with next to no track records because he just put them on the list and just put them on the bench in the past several months.
Well, and there are a few, there are at least one on the list that I know that clerked for Justice Kennedy. And as the president says that Justice Kennedy went to visit with him today before he made his announcement, and he might have had
it would be remarkable.
May have made a recommendation to the president that could be taken or not.
It would be remarkable if two Kennedy clerks ended up on the Supreme Court, because Justice Gorsuch was also clerked for Justice Kennedy.
Yeah, it would be very interesting. We're just seconds away, I believe, from the White House being able to hear from President Trump for the first time. He will now have a second chance of a Supreme Court nomination, a chance again to make his mark on the court. Lots of big decisions ahead of the court, as the judge was just saying. Let's listen to the president.
A man I also have great respect for, Justice Anthony. You know who I'm talking about. Justice Kennedy will be retiring, and he's a man that I've known for a long time and a man that I've respected for a long time. He's been a great justice of the Supreme Court. He is a man who is displaying great vision. He's displayed tremendous vision and tremendous heart, and he will be missed, but he will be retiring, and we will begin our search for a new justice of the United States Supreme Court that will begin immediately. and hopefully we're going to pick somebody who will be as outstanding. So I just want to thank Justice Kennedy for the years of tremendous service. He's a very spectacular man, really a spectacular man. And I know that he will be around hopefully for a long time to advise, and I believe he's going to be teaching and doing other things. So thank you to Justice Kennedy. Thank you.
Who will you pick to replace him, sir?
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Well, we have obviously numerous people. We have a list of 25 people that I actually had during my election. I had to 20, and as you know, I added 5 a little while ago. We have a very excellent list of great talented, highly educated, highly intelligent, hopefully tremendous people. I think the list is very outstanding. When I was running, I put down a list of 20 people because, not being a politician, I think people wanted to hear what some of my choices may be, and it was pretty effective. And I think you see the kind of quality that we're looking at when you look at that list. But I added 5 additional people to the list. So it will be somebody from that list. So we have now boiled it down to about 25 people.
And sir, when did you find out?
The World Cup, President Putin, the final.
Yes, no, I will tell you, we fought very hard to get it here. I think they're doing a fantastic job with the World Cup right now. It's in Russia, and I will tell you that it's exciting. My son loves soccer, and he loves watching the World Cup, and they have really done a fantastic job with the World Cup. It's exciting, even if you're a non-soccer fan. I'm a soccer fan a little bit, but I don't have much time.
What are you rooting for?
But, well, I'm rooting for everybody to do well. But, and with everybody is a very good thing. It's good for the world, it's good for us, it's good for everybody. So we'll probably be meeting sometime around my trip to Europe.
Do you know where?
That hasn't been determined yet. Probably I will know within an hour.
And what about the injunction on immigration? Will you fight that? The California judge who says reunited families must be put together.
Well, we're going to see, but we believe that families should be together also. So there's not a lot to fight. But
how do you guarantee that?
We believe families have to be together. But what we really do is we believe in very strong borders, no crime, and the Democrats believe in open borders and plenty of crime, because that's what you get with the open borders. I would like to introduce, however, the President of Portugal. And I'm sorry to bother you, but in our country, the selection of a justice of the United States Supreme Court is considered, I think we can all say, one of the most important events, one of the most important things for our country. I mean, you see the decisions that just came down, how big they are, how vital they are, and they can swing different ways depending on whom there might be in the court. So it's always been considered a tremendously important thing. Some people think outside of, obviously, war and peace, it's the most important thing that you could have. But another very important thing is introducing the President, the highly respected, I must say, President of Portugal. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, President. Well, as a constitutional law professor, I know how important it is when a justice in your Supreme Court retires, because it's a key institution for a country. So I just heard the news, and I imagine how important it is for you and for any United States president. Anyway, I'd like to tell you that we have a very long-lasting friendship and partnership.
Yes.
That started the moment we recognized you. We were the first neutral country to recognize the United States of America's independence. Although we had as our oldest ally England. Mm-hmm. So it was courageous at that time. Right. And I don't know if you know it, but your founding fathers celebrated independence with our wine, with Madeira wine. They made a toast.
Good taste.
With our Madeira wine. It's a long, long story, this one, our friendship and partnership, based on common values of democracy and freedom and rule of law and human rights, but also of a very strong community. fellow citizens that are both American and Portuguese, and they love the United States of America, and they love Portugal. There are around 1,500,000 Portuguese, Luso-American living here. They're very important. So it's not just a military, a political, and economic alliance. It's more than that. It's something very human, because we're speaking of 1,400,000 people that they live their love for two countries at the same time. As you spoke of soccer, let me then ask you something, well, make you a suggestion.
Go ahead.
If you're going to meet Mr. Putin, well, I was with him last week.
Good.
Yes, and he asked me to greet you. So, of course, he was expecting you, obviously. But anyway, don't forget that Portugal has the best player in the world. That is called Cristiano Ronaldo.
Oh,
I'm sure your son knows it.
He knows all about it.
And so, don't forget, if you ever go to Russia during the championship, don't forget Portugal is still there and wanting to win.
That's right, doing very well.
Yes.
Right. And they say he is
doing very, very, very well.
That's very good. And so tell me, how good a player is he? Are you impressed?
I'm very much impressed. He's the best player of the world, Cristiano Ronaldo. So in a sense, well, I think has been a success. I do agree with you.
Yeah,
the
great.
championship.
No,
yeah.
great. Yeah. I think
no doubt about it. For the world, for the world.
So will Christian ever run for president against you? You wouldn't win. You know he won't.
President, you know something. I must tell you. Portugal is not just the United States.
That's right.
That's
right.
different.
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. President, when did you learn that Justice Kennedy was retired?
About a half hour ago.
Were you surprised?
He came to the White House. We had a wonderful discussion just prior to meeting the president, and really had a very deep discussion. I got his ideas on things, including I asked him if he had certain people that he had great respect for that potentially could take his seat, which is a very hard seat to fill. So we talked about different things, and he was here for about a half an hour. I don't think you folks saw him come in and out, did you? I'm shocked. Boy, they've done a great job. That's a shocker. That's a shocker. But yeah, we had he just left a little while ago, just prior to meeting the president.
And sir, what he recommended? Would you give us any?
No, I won't do that. But he has, you know, there are certain names that are just outstanding. Names that you already know, to be honest with you. I mean, there are names that you know that are outstanding, highly respected, names that you would know, President. And we'll be looking at them. We'll be looking at some others, but they will come from the list of 25 people.
And, Mr. President, it's an election year. Would you give consideration to holding that spot open until the makeup of Congress is determined come November?
I haven't really thought about that. I think you want to go as quickly as possible. It's a process, but haven't really thought of that. But we had a big day yesterday, very big. We had a great decision today in terms of what was just released by the Supreme Court yesterday, obviously, with the travel ban was extremely big. And we had some tremendous elections. South Carolina, from my own standpoint, South Carolina, the governor, McMaster, was a big win. And as you know, I was very much involved in New York with the Congressman Donovan. So we're very happy. This was a good few days, and now I get to cap it off by meeting with the president of Portugal. And Portugal's been actually very important to our nation. And you're right, we have about 1.5 million people from Portugal here. So that's very important. No, I want them to do what they wanted. You know, the problem we have, and I told them this morning, I said, hey, pass it if you can. But I also want them to do what they want. We have a big immigration bill like everybody does, like you're talking, and everybody talks about immigration now, I think more than ever before. I told them a few hours ago, I said, look, pass something or come back with something that would be a derivation, but get something you want. The problem we have is we need Democratic votes in the Senate, and that's why I don't get overly excited with the House bill right now, because it's not going to pass in the Senate. You're not going to get the Democrats to vote for anything. If we gave them 100% of what they wanted and then doubled it, they still wouldn't pass it because they think it's a good election point. I think it's good for us because I think strong borders, I don't even know how you feel about that, but I think strong borders and no crime that's us. And I think that's going to be a great election point for us. So I told them 2 hours ago, I said, you know, do what you want. And ultimately, we'll come to something, and perhaps it'll be after the election, maybe it'll be before. But as of this moment, Democrats are not going to vote for anything because they really are resisting or obstructing. Okay? Thank you.
Mr. President, what about the progressive, sir?
Well, I think we'll be talking about Syria. I think we'll be talking about Ukraine. I think we'll be talking about many other subjects, and we'll see what happens. So you never know. You never know about meetings, what happens, right? But I think a lot of good things can come with meetings with people. We had great meetings with President Xi of China. We have, every place I've been, we have had great meetings. So maybe something positive will come out of it.
Mr. President, what about the progressive challenger that beat Joe Crowley, that young woman from New York? Are you worried about a blue wave?
Well, that was a shocker. Losing for Crowley to lose that election, that was a shocker. I was surprised. Everybody was surprised. We had somebody that's been in there for many years, Mr. President, and I think he probably took it for granted. And I can't say that I'm disappointed because I was never a big fan. But he lost his election, probably shouldn't have lost his election. Maybe you get a little complacent, you know, that does happen. You get complacent, and he lost. That's a big loss. I tell you what, that was a shocking loss. But it is what it is. Thank you all very much.
Mr. President, sir, Mr. President, are you worried your tariffs are backfiring?
Oh, they're doing great.
You think even with
By the way, the steel industry is absolutely doing great. The tariffs have been incredible, and the steel industry is doing great, and our country is doing great. You're seeing the results. The numbers coming out from the companies are far beyond what anybody ever thought possible. We're doing really good. But we have to have fair trade deals, and we're working on really fair trade deals. We're working with your representatives on fair trade deals. So
I heard you're going to receive President Juncker. That's good news.
Yes.
That's good news.
Thank you, everybody.
They're
working. It's going to be very good.
And Mr. President, as far as when you might meet with Putin, will it be after NATO?
Probably after.
Right after NATO,
Probably
you think?
after.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Could be. It'll be announced
Yeah,
first.
well, he's the president. We should ask. All right, that was the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief, President Donald J. Trump, commenting for the first time about his opportunity now to nominate another Supreme Court justice. And I believe I have with me now Ben Shapiro of DailyWire.com. He's the editor-in-chief and host of the Ben Shapiro Show, which I listen to daily. Ben, this broke just about 50 minutes ago. Really changed the day, the summer, and possibly the court for generations to come. I'd love your thoughts on it.
I mean, it's an astonishing change. I mean, Anthony Kennedy has been a swing vote on a number of major issues. Now, I would caution that Justice Roberts has a tendency to try and be that swing vote from time to time. So what we could see is an evolution of Chief Justice Roberts toward the center. But barring that, this could be the first time in generations that conservatives have actually controlled a majority on the Supreme Court, given the fact that President Trump's list of 25 potential justices, virtually all of them have longstanding track records as strong conservatives. If the president makes the right pick here, not only is it going to energize the base for 2018 and presumably for his re-election run in 2020, but also it could radically change the nature of the court's move, because the four hardcore folks on the left on the court would certainly have moved the court in a radically different direction than the current court is constituted had Justice Kennedy waited for 3 years and for a Democratic president possibly to retire.
Let me read to you a few of the issues that from the left that they are telling the Democrats, you know, this is what could happen if President Trump gets to replace Anthony Kennedy on the court, that the court would be more likely to overturn Roe v. Wade, restrict affirmative action, roll back anti-discrimination law, and protect the death penalty and solitary confinement, just to name a few. So on the left, that's what they're concerned about. Your thoughts?
I don't think that's completely inaccurate. I mean, the fact is that Roe v. Wade is a horribly decided decision. Any justice that the president appoints should be against Roe v. Wade, because anybody who's read the Constitution should be against Roe v. Wade, even if you're a pro-choice person. Now, the left is immediately jumping to the conclusion that even if Roe v. Wade were overturned, that would mean half the country outlaws abortion forthwith. I think that is highly unlikely. But with that said, what we are looking at is a possible epical shift in the nature of the Supreme Court. It really is. It could not be bigger, and the timing of it is astonishing for 2018 for him.
All right, Ben Shapiro, thank you for joining me today. And up next is Senator Ted Cruz of Texas. Senator, I believe that you're there in the Capitol, so thank you for making your way over to the cameras. You've actually argued more cases in front of the Supreme Court, I think, than any of your colleagues there in the Senate. You were very much aware of all the Supreme Court nominations of the last couple of decades. Your thoughts today on this opportunity for President Trump to replace Anthony Kennedy?
Well, today is really an historic day. If we look at the first nomination that President Trump made, Neil Gorsuch, it was an incredibly strong nomination. But that at the end of the day was essentially a defensive pick. It was replacing Justice Antonin Scalia, one of the greatest justices ever to serve on the U.S. Supreme Court. And what the Gorsuch pick did at the very best is maintain the status quo. The Justice Kennedy vacancy, on the other hand, is an opportunity to really have a profound impact on the court, an impact on the court and that could last for decades. And I think there is no issue more important, no issue more fundamental to what President Trump has achieved, to what the Senate majority of Republicans has achieved, than nominating and confirming principled constitutionalists to the Supreme Court and the federal courts who will uphold our rights and protect the Bill of Rights.
I remember when Chief Justice Rehnquist passed away, and the liberals, they weren't too concerned about President George W. Bush nominating a conservative because it was replacing a conservative with a conservative. The stakes here are considerably higher for conservatives and liberals, Republicans and Democrats. What do you think from a strategy standpoint for Republicans? What would be the best way to try to get this through the chamber? And do you favor getting it done before or after the midterms?
Well, you know, Justice Kennedy was appointed to the court in 1987, so 31 years ago. For 31 years, Justice Kennedy has been at the crossroads of virtually every major 5-4 decision from the court for over 3 decades. And so this is an opportunity. What I hope the president will do is nominate a principled constitutionalist, someone whose #1 focus will be being faithful to the Constitution and Bill of Rights. That means defending the First Amendment, defending free speech and religious liberty, defending the Second Amendment, defending the 10th Amendment, all of our basic liberties. And in terms of timing, I expect to see the president come forth with a nomination quickly. I would anticipate in the next couple of weeks. And I believe the Senate we will take up, and I believe we will confirm this nominee before the election in November. I expect that we'll have confirmation hearings in all likelihood in September or October of this year and confirm a strong constitutionalist to the court.
It's probably a good thing that Senator Mitch McConnell has said that everybody's going to have to work in August anyway, and certainly going to have to do some double duty. Let me ask you then about the possibility of what issues you think are the most important ones going forward, because Judge Napolitano earlier was mapping those out for us. Like, there's big issues in front of the court because technology's changed. The government is way behind in keeping up with that. According to you, like, what do you think are the big ones that you want to see settled under a conservative court?
Look, there are issues across the spectrum of practically every issue that you can think of, but nothing matters more than the basic approach. Are you faithful to the Constitution and faithful to the law? What the left, what Democrats want to see is a judicial activist court. They want to see a radical left-wing agenda forced on the country from 5 unelected judges on the court. You know, from my perspective, I don't want to see a conservative court. I don't want to see a court that is mandating conservative policy outcomes. I think the place to fight for conservative policy outcomes is where I serve now, the United States Senate, the elected legislature. What I believe the American people want to see is a Supreme Court with far greater judicial humility that doesn't view its role as just enacting whatever policy preferences they might have, but simply following the law, enforcing it as written, not acting like a super legislature and resolving every difficult issue, but leaving it to the people's elected branches and ultimately the American people to make policy decisions. That's the constitutionalist approach to this.
One of the names on the list of President Trump put out on November 17th of 2017 is one of your colleagues, Mike Lee of Utah. Do you think